All right, so this is Jots, Tittles, and Torah fulfillment. So we're going to see how the Torah has been fulfilled. Quote from Matthew 5:18, "For assuredly, I say to you, till heaven and earth pass away," so until this happens, "one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law," so no portion of the law can be removed, "until all is fulfilled." So from the statement above, it's clear that no part of Torah can pass away and thus no longer be observed today without the entirety of Torah passing away along with heaven and earth. However, this understanding places us in a very peculiar situation, as much of the Torah is not being observed today. And when you look above, you see a sky, and you look down on your feet, you are walking on the ground. Same sky, same ground on which Jesus walked. So how is this fulfilled? It's a great question. So which generation is the terminal generation? We're going to definitely dig into that much deeper. I've already covered some of it in the previous slides, but we'll get into the meat of it here. And the Torah being fulfilled and the Torah being destroyed are two different things. Which was accomplished and what does this mean? I don't cover that in too much detail, but a lot of times people read Matthew 5:17 through 18. They generally will say, we'll see, Jesus says he did not come to destroy the law. He did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. And they say, well, thus the law is still in effect today. It doesn't. Those are two very different things. Destroying the law and fulfilling the law are very different. And we really should be able to tell the difference. So we'll get into this a little bit more, and hopefully things will become clear. So let's look at this verse. Luke 16:16. "The law and the prophets were until John. Since that time, the kingdom of God has been preached and everyone is pressing into it." So how far do the law and the prophets extend till? According to this verse, they extend until John. Matthew 11:13, "For all the prophets in the law prophesied until John." So how long and for how far do the prophets in the law prophesy? They prophesy until John. Here on the right, I've got a number that took us from Bible Hub, a number of different verses explaining the same verse, Matthew 11:13, it looks like, from a few different translations. I really like this NLT. I might get an NLT Bible maybe and start reading this. This is very, very thorough. "For before John came, all the prophets in the law of Moses look forward to this present time." It doesn't leave a lot of confusion as to how far the law and the prophets are. This Aramaic Bible is pretty nice too. "All the prophets in the written law have prophesied until John." I'm telling you, it's a very, very interesting phrase. I really wonder, how else does a person look at this except to say that the law and the prophets prophesied till John? So here we see Jesus say that the law and the prophets only prophesied till John. Seeing as the end of the world occurred after the murder of John, I suspect this verse is really talking about the generation of John, of which Jesus is also a part. He's only a few months younger than John the Baptist. Jesus placed the judgment upon that current generation. A plain reading of this verse in context does not allow prophecy to extend beyond the generation of John, which is 2,000 years ago. There's not a lot else a person can really say. The verse is either... Man, I really dislike this kind of talk in a way, because the verse is either so poorly translated that there is not a way to gain any understanding of what the verse says, or it's translated perfect, meaning that the event already happened. I mean, that's the reoccurring theme, I guess you could say, of this presentation, but we will move further along. Here is Hebrews 8:13. In that he says a new covenant, he has made the first obsolete. Now, what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. So here we see a verse that I suspect is not being taken seriously in the Hebrew roots movement. We're very quick to say that the old covenant is the same as the new, but this verse specifically says that what is old is obsolete and is ready to vanish. That has entirely disappeared. This just came to me. But think about a floppy disk. Some people that are seeing this remember a floppy disk. A floppy disk is obsolete. It carries, I think, 1.44 megabytes of data on I think, a 3-inch disk. Maybe a little smaller than that. I mean, it's about 3 inches. I actually think it is 3.5 inches wide. I haven't seen one of these since grade school. A floppy disk is obsolete and was near disappearing, whenever, the next level of disk came, which is a slightly smaller and still barely carried any data. And now people have thumb drives or store the stuff on a cloud. Something that, and thus those very important at the time technologies became obsolete and vanished. That very same thinking is what is being expressed here in this verse. The entire order of sacrifice, cleansing through washings, various meats, and all of this is part of an order that is growing to be obsolete when this is being written 2,000 years ago. It was near or ready to vanish away even then. So reading what I put here, we're very quick to say that the old new covenant is the same, but this verse specifically says that what is old is obsolete and is ready to vanish, that is entirely disappear. If what was old disappeared, how is what is new the same? Is a floppy disk like a jump drive? Is a floppy disk like the cloud? Kind of. They both store stuff, but in every other way, they're not even remotely the same. If the old was near disappearing when Hebrews was written, how has it remained until today, 2,000 years later? Of course, another indication of the writer doesn't know what they're saying, or they know exactly what they're saying and the order is over. If it was near disappearing when this letter was written, it cannot remain today, which in short means that this entire order is gone, which is evident as the entirety of the temple service ceased in 70 AD at its destruction. Take note, no physical temple exists today, which is perfectly fulfilling the prophecy of Revelation 21:22, which we've already talked about in the past, a few different slides ago. But Revelation 21:22, John sees into the new heaven and new earth, and he sees there is no temple therein. Ta-da! You live there. There is no temple. It hasn't been one since it was destroyed. I went ahead and did a copy and just a little snippet of this word vanish, aphodismos. Look, the word means disappear or be destroyed. The order was destroyed and disappeared. It's gone. If it was near disappearing then, it remains today? No, it's gone. We already live in the new currently. Sometimes I think of what it would be like to really talk to, that question, what person would you like to talk to from all history? I would want to talk to Paul. I really would. Is Paul just a crazy man who was deceived and wrote a bunch of stuff that we now read and he was a crazy person? Or does he know what he is talking about? If he knows what he's talking about, I'm telling you, man. And I suspect Paul is the writer of Hebrews, even though people have disagreements about that. That's certainly fine. It's not identified. But I'm telling you, I'd love to talk to Paul. That guy is either a crazy person or he knows exactly what he is saying. And if he knows what he's saying, the end of time happened in the distant past. Moving along. Luke 21:20-23. But when you see, who's you, see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is near. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are in the midst of her depart, and let not those who are in the country enter her. For these are the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe to those who are pregnant, and to those who are nursing babies in those days. For there will be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. Couple things. So here we see Jesus say with the plainest, most direct language possible, I don't know how you can be more emphatic, honestly, that all has been written regarding the final vengeance. In other words, that's Revelation. It's going to take place in the days when Jerusalem is surrounded with armies. And according to the context, the people living in Jesus' day, that would be, of course, the terminal generation, will see the event. When you, who's you? You is the people he's speaking to reappropriate the word you as being you that lives in 2016 every single time is utter foolishness. I don't even know what to call that. The word "you" certainly can mean you living in 2016 in reappropriation, but you can't reappropriate an event. The event happened to the people it was initially spoken to. You is always referring to the initial person who first heard those words. Uh, Take note that all that has been written regarding vengeance, referring here to verse 22, is taking place in Jerusalem and is thus not a global catastrophe. I actually laugh about this because when I first saw this verse, I did not pick this verse up myself. I was actually reading a book and a guy mentioned Luke 21:22, and I was so shocked by the power of the verse because there's nothing you can gain from the context that allows you to think that it's talking about not everything that's fulfilled. It literally is saying, even according to the general context, back up and read 5 chapters back if you have to, it's referring to a vengeance that is fulfilling all the vengeance spoken of, the vengeance in Jeremiah, if you will, the vengeance in Isaiah, the vengeance that's spoken of in Daniel, more specifically. Is happening right then. So these aren't, if you go back and even read those prophecies in the Old Testament, Isaiah 24, Daniel chapter 12, you'll find those are also localized catastrophes. They're not global catastrophes. This is a total invention of our modern day. In 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed, which is the fulfillment of all vengeance. That's when Jerusalem was surrounded by armies. The end of the world, the passing of heaven and earth, and thus the Torah as well. Fulfilling all things that have been written is the fulfillment of the Torah. When all that has been written is fulfilled, the Torah will pass. That's why not a single jot of the Torah can pass before all is fulfilled. Any piece of the Torah being fulfilled is the entirety of the law being fulfilled and is the passage of heaven and earth. Here is Daniel 9:24. Very, very interesting piece of text. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city. To finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So here we find a prophecy regarding the end of days in the book of Daniel. It's a checklist of sorts. What can one say has been left unfulfilled? Without much, if any debate, the anointed Holy One, the bringer of everlasting righteousness, the cover of sin, transgression, and iniquity, is the Messiah who came and completed this task 2,000 years ago. When I first came across this verse, when I was working in this study of trying to understand the end of time, I was really surprised because as far as a checklist goes, there's nothing that's in this list that really anyone would say has been unfulfilled. Without saying the Messiah has come. And honestly, I am telling you that if the Christian belief structure is correct, meaning that Jesus must return in our future, then every person is still inside of their sins. We should actually just be listening to the Jews. The Jews then are completely correct, but they're not right. We are. Jesus did come. He established all of this. It's all finished. It's all done. What more does a man say? Take note that vision and prophecy, you mentioned right here, vision and prophecy have been sealed. There has not been a legitimate prophet sanctioned by God since the generation of John, of which the apostles were a part. Here is your answer as to why all end-time prognosticators, speculators, so-called prophets are never right. Vision and prophecy ended nearly 2,000 years ago. If someone says God told them in a dream or vision about the end of days and its occurrence today, 2016 or future, according to this text, they are wrong. I feel too strong. It's too strong, perhaps, to say that they're liars. It's really hard for me to believe that someone like 119 Ministries or Jonathan Kahn or John Hagee, it's just too difficult for me to believe that these people are just blatant liars. I just think they're deceived. I think they're incorrect. What are you going to say? He says right here in Daniel 9:24, when all the other things that you say are accomplished 2,000 years ago, are fulfilled, vision and prophecy will be sealed up as well. Take note. Every guy who gets up and says, every woman even, this past year there was a woman who got up, and black woman, half Jewish, I think she said, had been receiving visions of the end of time since the time she was a child. predicted that the end of time was going to, the horsemen of Revelation were going to marched across a calendar in her vision, and the months that they marched across were October, November, and December of fall, essentially, of 2015. I'm recording this in May of 2016. That lady was wrong, dude. I mean, what are you saying? She was wrong. The fact she was wrong should just be really stand out in our minds, but we forget that people were wrong. And then new prophecy people come forward, they rehash the same information, and then they're wrong. And we continue to do this year after year after year. Who's the fool, Final point here, 7 times 70 equals 490 years. I'm not going to get into all this really in this presentation, but try hard as a man may, no person is able to explain how this 490-year prophecy, which is what the 70 weeks is, from the days of Daniel, are able to extend to 2016. It either happened or it's a false prophecy. And it's very interesting. I once had a conversation with a man, this is many years ago, where he was discussing this very same point, that Daniel's end time prophecy here in Daniel 9 is a 70-week prophecy, which comes out to 490 years. How is this an unfulfilled prophecy? Well, the reason it's unfulfilled is because we insert a gap into the roughly the 69 into the 70th week. We insert a gap. There is no gap. There is no gap prophesied. If there was a gap, it wouldn't be a 70-week prophecy. Stuff like this, I'm telling you, we got to really consider this thing happened already. Why is it better to enjoy sensationalism than to enjoy the logical conclusion, the reasonable conclusion? But as I said before, a logical conclusion, it weighs 5 pounds. But an emotional conclusion, it weighs 5,000. A person can conclusively show that the event already happened from the text, and that'll do nothing to quell emotion. This strange slide that I've put together, I never thought it looked strange until just now. This slide is showing you the multiple references to the current generation. Which generation is being discussed? Well, in Matthew 24:34, starting off here on the far left, assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all things take place. The question is asked all the time, who is you? You is the person he's speaking to, which means that the generation of people that heard him say this word, they are the terminal generation. Matthew 23:36, assuredly I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. Who is you? You is the person that he is speaking to, which means that the person who first heard these words out of the mouth of Jesus, that person is living in the generation that's terminal. They're the ones that are living in the time of the end. Here's Mark 13:30. Assuredly I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all things take place. Who is you? Matthew 12:39. But he answered and said to them, an evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and no sign shall be given to it except the son of the prophet Jonah. What generation was he talking about? Well, he's talking about the current generation. They're the ones that are asking him for a sign. Don't you remember the Jews said, since you do all this, what sign will you show us? Luke 11:50 and 51. This is one of my favorites, actually. That the blood of all the prophets which was shed from the foundation of the world may be required of this generation. From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the temple, yes, I say to you, it shall be required of this generation. And once again, what's the question? Who is you? You is the person he's speaking to. I mean, I feel bad in a way having to point this out, except for the fact that we should know how to read better than to take you and reappropriate it as being me, Justin. You is clearly the person who first heard this, which means that they are the ones that live in the end of days. They're the ones that see the event happen. The event happens. You live in the new heaven and new earth right now. Whether you want to admit it to yourself or not, take note. No person who predicts anything regarding the end of days is ever right. They have a 100% failure rate Is that not enough to reconsider the situation? I would say so. Here's Acts 2:40, Peter. And with many other words, he testified and exhorted them, saying, be saved from this perverse generation. You really wonder to yourself, here's a good question to ask as well. Who is them? Well, them is the people Peter is speaking to, meaning that the generation that is perverse currently existed when he said those words. I'm telling you, this is a enormously horrible problem, but it is what it is. Luke 21, so you also, when you see these things happening, know that the kingdom of God is near. Assuredly, I say to you, this generation will by no means pass away till all things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will by no means pass away. I think we've already seen enough times, but the question is still asked, who is you? And of course, as we've seen in all the other instances, and many, 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 many more, you is them, the people that first received this message. So here we have a collection of statements from the New Testament regarding the generation living in those days. From these verses and others, it's clear that the generation of people living in the first century were the terminal generation. Thus the end of time, including the passage of heaven and earth, and thus the fulfillment of the Torah, was happening in their generation, their days, which was 2,000 years ago. We today in 2016 live after the end of time, and by no means can be the terminal generation, nor can any future generation. It's pure sensationalism. I think it's hard for us to imagine that we have been swept up in emotional, sensational doctrine. And as a person provides a logical conclusion, like I said before, it doesn't weigh enough. It weighs nothing in comparison to the weight of an emotional conclusion. So let's look at this phrase, forever throughout your generations. We'll start here in the top left, Leviticus 23. You shall eat neither bread nor parched grain nor fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your God. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations and all your dwellings. Great question to ask again, who is you? Here's a perfect example of the word you not only referring to the people that it was initially spoken to. They're supposed to keep doing this for as long as their generations are reckoned. So when did generations end? Well, generations ended at the terminal generation. That's why the events that are decreed as being forever are not done in the new heaven and new earth. But moving on, Leviticus 23:14, pertaining to a grain offering. Again, not offered, not done, not observed, hasn't been observed since 70 AD. Leviticus 24. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, command the children of Israel that they bring to you pure oil of pressed olives for the light, to make the lamps burn continually outside the veil of the testimony in the tabernacle of meeting. Aaron shall be in charge of it from the evening until morning before the Lord continually. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. He shall be in charge of the lamps on the pure gold lampstand before the Lord continually. So who is doing this right now? The answer would be no one. No descendant of Aaron is doing this. I mean, come on. It's a statute that can only be observed when there is a dwelling place. The dwelling place that was last on the earth was the temple. The temple's destruction is in our past. Thus, we're in new heaven and new earth. That's the reason this is not being observed. So when someone says, how long is forever in your generations? It's forever until generations are no longer reckoned, which is exactly what happened. And there again is Leviticus 6:18. All the males amongst the children of Aaron may eat it. It shall be a statute forever in your generations concerning the offerings made by fire to the Lord. Everyone who touches them must be holy. Again, as a grain offering. We use this exact same verse much earlier in the presentation regarding the word forever. And once again, you can see it's forever in your generations. The reason why this is not done is because generations have ended. And in fact, this entire order, which is called becoming obsolete in the book of Hebrews, near vanishing, Hebrews 8:13. That order ended. It's done. That's why it's not observed anymore today. That's why the Torah has passed. That's why it doesn't matter. That's why none of the things like stepping on a lot of toes probably as I say this, but I mean, the reason why these things are, I often in conversations about, can we start a fire on the Sabbath? It's like, well, of course you can. Starting a fire on the Sabbath was a problem back then in the Old Covenant, but it's not a problem now. The Old Covenant and the New Covenant are clearly not the same. The Old Covenant is referred to as being obsolete. What does the man say? So here we see a series of verses where Israel is commanded to keep a particular ordinance forever in their generations. These commands and many others will ordain forever can only be performed when a dwelling place of God exists in the physical realm. However, in the new heaven and earth, there is no dwelling place of God. Revelation 21:22 has been observed previously. Seeing as no dwelling place exists in the new heaven and earth, these ordinances, though decreed forever, cannot be done, or perhaps more properly, need not be done at all, and thus have passed away, which makes sense, as at this point heaven and earth have also passed. So it's not just the fact that they aren't observed today and they will be observed in the future. No. They have been entirely fulfilled and thus passed away, which is, of course, the passage of all the Torah as well as heaven and earth. These events are done. The confusion with Christianity is that Christians say that the law passed away at the cross. Baloney. The law clearly did not pass away at the cross. The law passed at the destruction of the temple, the dwelling place of God. Once it was removed from the physical realm, the law passed. Heaven and earth passed as well. That's all that happened. It's figurative language that needs to be interpreted figuratively. So take this understanding one step further and consider our present day 2016, where there has not been a dwelling place of God for nearly 2,000 years. And the commands above, as well as many others, are not observed. Even Torah observant people do not observe any of those commands. I know, I'm one of them. Herein, if understood, is evidence that we live in the new heaven and earth right now. The Torah has passed. Being entirely fulfilled. Each of those commands is more than a jot and a tittle. And the fact that none of these things are done, they're fulfilled. They haven't been done in 2,000 years. That's fulfillment if there ever was one. But we shall go further. Revelation 21:22, but I saw no temple in it, for the Lord God Almighty and the temple and the Lamb are its temple. Here we see into the new heaven and earth, and according to John, there is no temple. This very plainly means that the very commands that are given in the Torah ordained forever are not actually forever, or more specifically, the new heaven and earth is outside of forever, where we live currently. The end-time view of many, Messianics in particular, pay close attention to this, is that after nearly 2,000 years without a temple, a new temple will be built in our days. That's 2016 future. Sacrifices in the Levitical priesthood will be reinstated, only to be destroyed during the tribulation. And then after the tribulation, another temple will be built, and sacrifices again reinstated, this time ruled over by Jesus for 1,000 years. And this is generally figured to be the temple of Ezekiel 40 through 48. At that time, we will all be able to keep Torah perfectly. But after this second temple is built, post-tribulation, that temple will also be destroyed, along with the entire planet. And in the new planet, there is no temple. So reasonably, the sacrificial order at that time will cease for all time. So even if you follow the Messianic eschatology all the way to the end, you'll find that in the end of the Messianic eschatology, we do not keep Torah. Meaning we don't sacrifice animals, we don't do any of the temple practices, we don't do any of the stuff for the dwelling place of God, even according to our own eschatology, our own view of the end. We have a time period where the Torah is not kept. Just move it forward. Just synthesize the data in your mind even. That means that we are in the new heaven and new earth currently. There's no way that any prophecy, any statements made in the New Testament regarding the end of time could be interpreted by the people who first received those letters or first heard those words as an event that's going to take place in 2,000 or 4,000 or 6,000 or 10,000 years. The only way for them to take that information is that it's happening immediately, which means we live after that in the new heaven and earth right now. The Messianic view that's been represented here in the second bullet point is nonsensical. It's entirely incomprehensible to anyone living in Jesus' day, especially when one considers that Jesus told them they would see the passage of heaven and earth in their lifetime, as we just read a few slides ago. So here are a series of verses regarding the rules. So just because the Torah has been fulfilled does not mean God's people are to live without restraint. Rules still remain for being part of the kingdom of God, but as one can see from the passages above, these restraints, while originating from the Torah, are primarily encouraging upright moral character. The Torah exists in the new heaven and earth, but since this is a spiritual kingdom, by necessity, the many natural rules of the Torah are obsolete and thus have passed away. The Torah has become obsolete and thus vanished as it is this day in 2016. Consider Jesus' statement starting in Matthew 5 even, going through chapter 7. And one can see that upright moral character is the focus of the conversation and is a pillar of Jesus' earthly ministry, which I don't think anyone really denies. These verses, like 1 Corinthians 6, 9 through 10, do you not know that the unrighteous will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived, neither fornicators, nor idolaters, nor adulterers, nor homosexuals, nor sodomites, nor thieves, nor covetous, nor drunkards, nor revilers, nor extortioners will inherit the kingdom of God. It's not a kingdom that has doors on it that you physically walk into. It's a spiritual kingdom. Like Revelation 22:15, outside are dogs and sorcerers and the sexually immoral and murderers and idolaters and whoever loves and practices a lie. Scary stuff, because that's the new heaven and new earth, which means that outside are sinners, essentially. Meaning that this is not, many people think in the new heaven and new earth there are no sinners. But unfortunately, in the new heaven and new earth, according to what it says in Revelation, sinners exist. Something to really consider. Moving forward. So from the previous slides, one should be able to understand some of the arguments for why the Torah is passed and why we live in the new heaven and earth right now. My goodness, I feel like I flew through that presentation, but I really hope that this is at least something that people can think about or consider at least. Read the Torah. You'll read Leviticus 23. Read the Torah just in general. Read Leviticus in particular, and you'll see what I mean. We don't do this stuff. We say we're Torah observant, but we do not do the things that are in the Torah. Why is that? It's because the Torah passed. We're doing this out of choice. We're actually doing it out of confusion, technically, if we're willing to admit it. Hopefully, the verses provided have helped shed light on who was the terminal generation. And again, we'll help one understand why the end of time, the passage of heaven and earth took place in the first century. I provided 5 arguments as to why it's fulfilled. Hopefully by this argument, this is like the 5th one. It's already kind of clear. If these arguments are true, then the event happened. If one takes their time reading the Torah, become clear that a great many things spelled out in the Torah are not being observed today. When a person asks why certain Torah commands are not observed today, the answer is generally that such and such a command will be observed when there is a temple. Again, as I've shown in the previous slide, that doesn't make any sense. However, considering that a physical temple has been replaced by the spiritual, it's clear that these things will never be done again. And thus they have permanently passed away, showing that heaven and earth also passed. You live on the other side of Torah now. I used to wonder all the time, how is it that they're able to, how is it that people are able to have all these fights and discussions? How can there be so many people that go to church on Sunday? I used to wonder, when the Bible clearly says that Sabbath is the day. Well, it's because the Sabbath is part of the covenant. The covenantal agreement is over. The new covenantal order does not command an individual to necessarily keep any specific days. That's the difficulty that exists. People don't want to hear that. I tell you what, that's not not something that we're going to consider. So let's move on to the conclusion of the matter. If my interpretation of the information provided is accurate, one must conclude that the end of the world occurred in the past, the Torah has been fulfilled, and we live in the new heaven and earth right now. If indeed the Torah has passed, and we live in the new heaven and earth right now, then by necessity, many of the practices ordained in the Torah have passed away and no longer need be observed. These practices would at least include feast days, cleanliness ordinances, and of course sacrifices. While some may choose to continue observing these obsolete ordinances, this is nothing more than a personal choice, and by no means would impact one's relationship with the Father, and thus has zero impact on salvation. Much ground has been covered in this presentation, and strongly held ideologies have probably been challenged. Much meat has been provided, but it's on you to digest. I guess I could be wrong too, right? I highly recommend looking into the history of what happened in 70 AD, as I'm quite certain most believers in the Messiah do not understand the significance of the event, especially since it's ancient history. That's a long time ago, Once the magnificence of the temple at Sid Jesus' day is understood, and it becomes much easier, I think, to understand how destruction was the end of the world. That's why I tried to include that video so people can kind of see a little bit of what the temple was like. Look, this thing going away is a significant event. It is the end of the world. Why does this matter? People say that frequently, I think. I personally think it's not so much asked from a inquisitive mind standpoint, but probably more as a jab. Just kind of a thought of like, well, it doesn't make any difference, is what people are trying to say. And the main reason why this matters is because we're supposed to be showing the truth. We can't exposing the lie. We can't be supporting a lie. If indeed the end of the world has passed, we're lying to people when we say that they're living in the last days, and God is no fan of liars, even if they're deceived ones. Any relationship built on falsehood is faulty and more than likely doomed for failure. Thus, if we are bringing people into a relationship with Christ based on the false understanding of living in the last days, we should not be surprised when so many people fall away from the faith. This is part of what you're witnessing in Christianity. I don't think we see it as much in a Hebrew root standpoint, but we do see it. The problem is this: it's the last days. I have a friend of mine that, I'm telling you, this guy personally was a bit destroyed when he found out that the Shemitah that Jonathan Cahn wrote at least 2 books over and countless presentations, he was shocked when the Shemitah did not play out and result in a stock market crash and the destruction of the economy. And I said to the guy, you realize that when it says, when I bring you into the land, it doesn't mean you. It means the Israelites. You don't live in the land of Israel. You live in America. The Shemitah doesn't apply to you. I sometimes was blown away that that level of confusion existed, that we couldn't even tell the difference between the land. If we can't even tell what the land was, what the land is, we're really in a bad spot. Many people are making unreasonable, life-altering decisions based off of the fear of the end of days. How can we believers in the Messiah be seen as reliable counsel when our many end-of-days predictions are proven false year after year? I wonder all the time. Can we really blame people for turning their backs on Christ, turning their backs on various ministries, when the message we preach is loaded with endless speculation over his return? I would say no, we can't. I wonder how these ministries are able to survive and grow and thrive. How is it possible? Week after week, year after year, more and more teachings on the end of days. How many books has John Hagee written? My goodness. And they've all been shown to be his predictions. Hal Lindsey from the 60s, Tim LaHaye in the Left Behind series, all of this stuff. This is sensationalism. Why don't we just call it what it is? How can this continue year after year? I really wonder. I guess this is the true statement regarding America. A sucker is born every minute, If the end of days is in our past, then those preaching an end of days doctrine today are false prophets. They're false prophesying at the very least. These people that said they had dreams of this, they saw a vision of this, they're lying, They probably saw the visions. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. But their interpretation of the vision is false, has been shown numerous times. When one considers the great number of books, speaking engagements, movies, etc., focusing on the end of days, it's clear to see that there is a lot of money in promoting the end of the world. Yet what does a man profit to gain so much and lose his own soul? So that is it. Shalom, everybody. I hope that helps. And we'll see you guys later.